Jai Hind, everybody. We have just witnessed the termination of Operation Sindhu from 7th to 10th May, which is still continuing and in some kind of pause mode. And we have seen as to how the technology and higher event weaponry has been used between India and Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan was supported by China as well as Turkey. But beside that, in today as we speak, you are seeing the the missile duels and so many other things are happening between Iran and Israel, and a lot of things also have happened, and they are still continuing between Russia and Ukraine as well as between Israel and Hamas and other places before the Israel got the entangled with Iran. So technology is one thing which is going to change the way we have to fight our future wars. But this statement has got no relevance unless, as armed forces, we prepare for the capability development, skilling our people, and create relevant doctrine and the practical norms to adopt those technologies will be left behind. We are very fortunate today that General Panwar has consented to be our speaker on this very important subject. He is the best whom we can get today in the country, and I'm sure you all will benefit a lot through his deliberations. I have had the opportunity of interacting with him on a number of occasions, and every time he was, par excellence. So without much ado, I'll now request one of my research interns to introduce General Panwar, and then I'll request you, sir, to commence your talk.
Good morning, everyone. It's both an honor and a privilege for me to introduce our distinguished guest today, Lieutenant General Dr. R.S. Panwar. General Panwar superannuated from the Corps of Signals in 2016 after 4 decades of military service. He has commanded an Armored Division Signal Regiment, an Electronic Warfare Brigade, 81 Sub-Area, 101 Area, and the Military College of Telecommunication Engineering, which is a center of excellence for ICT, electronic warfare, cyber warfare, and artificial intelligence. He holds a doctoral degree in computer science from IIT Bombay and is a recipient of the coveted Distinguished Alumnus Award from the same institution. A graduate of prestigious National Defense College, General Panwar's qualification include a Master of Management Studies degree at Osmania University and a special one-semester cryptology course at IIT Delhi. He is presently a distinguished fellow at United Service Institution of India and is engaged in evolving strategic thoughts in the areas of non-kinetic warfare, responsible military AI, and other disruptive military technologies. For the last 4 years, he has been an active participant in track-to diplomacy efforts for achieving consensus on principle and good practices for responsible AI development in military domain, involving experts from the United States, China, European Union, Russia, and India. The General has participated in 10 international conferences, roundtables over the last 3 years, and has a number of publications to his credit. With this brief introduction, I would now like to hand over the session to Dr. Panwar, sir, who will be speaking on the topic Tech-Enabled Future Warfare, Imperatives for Capabilities Development. Please join me warmly welcoming Dr. R.S. Panwar. Thank you.
Sir, all yours now.
Thanks, General Ashok. Thanks for that introduction. And at the outset, I would like to thank DG CENJOWS, General Ashok, for inviting me to give this talk. It is indeed an honor. Now, coming to the topic given to me, Tech-Enabled Future Warfare Capability Development, as has just been brought out, I would like to start by making a couple of broad comments. I'm sure we have all heard many times the refrain that while the nature of warfare is constant, its character is changing. It is my contention that disruptive new technologies are the predominant factor which drives this change. And the most notable manifestations of the changing battle space have been seen firstly during the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict and now for the last over 3 years in the Russia-Ukraine conflicts. And we too got a flavor of the shape of things to come during the active phase of recent Op Sindoor, which, as you know, is still continuing. I would also like to highlight that the content of my talk has been largely influenced by two recent initiatives. The first is, of course, the Future Warfare course, a brainchild of CDS, for which I was privileged to be one of the mentors. The first full version of which was conducted by CENJOWS recently, as you're all aware. The other was an army study ordered by the chief on a near-term action plan for tech absorption into the Indian Army. This relates to what the DG just made a comment on. Unless we do capability development, there is no point. 5 veterans were invited to carry out the study, and I'm happy to say we were given unprecedented support by the serving hierarchy in carrying out the study. The final report was submitted by us and presented just over a month ago. Deliberations during both these initiatives have contributed significantly to the content of this talk. Now I'll get on to the topic per se, and before that, let me share my presentation. I hope it's visible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. Right. So, just a second. So I will be, so this is the broad content. Essentially what I'm going to do is, when we talk of technologies, a wide spectrum of technologies. So we need to find a way of identifying which are these disruptive technologies which need to be focused on. And while doing so, I try to relate it to doctrinal and operational concepts. So that will be the first part. And thereafter, we'll get on to how different technologies are affecting various facets of warfare. And while each of these is being tackled, the capability development in each case will also be brought out along while we are tackling that. And towards the end, there'll be some general remarks on capability development per se. So that's the broad way in which I intend to proceed. Now, starting with the first part. Now, this might sound a little theoretical, but uh, I would like to relate it to the concept of revolution in military affairs, because really speaking, I feel some of these technologies are leading to revolutionary effects on the battlefield. So, what do we call an RMA? Generally, new technology innovation leads to new systems, which lead to change in doctrinal concepts and operations and structural changes, organizational changes. So that's what generally an RMA is defined as. And over a period of time, different authors have given different conceptualizations of what have been the RMAs. One of the ones which I like is one by Krepinovich, who defines 10 different RMAs which have taken place over the last few centuries. 6 of them I've related here. It starts with the infantry revolution, longbow, etc., etc., and finishes with the nuclear revolution, so to say, at the end of World War II. So that's the broad range which have been defined earlier. Now, what relates to us are these two. These are names which I have given: the ongoing ICT RMA and the looming AI RMA. So, two revolutionary concepts. The first one started on what I'm referring to as ICT. ICT stands for Information and Communication Technologies. So, all these RMAs are triggered by technologies. So, ICT technologies triggered this RMA in late 80s, early 90s. The first impact was held during the first Iraq war, and it is still ongoing in some sense. So, we'll go into some detail of that. And the looming, why I'm calling it looming, it is the AI, actually AI robotics RMA is just about having its impact felt as of now in all these recent battles, as you've seen. And it is going to unfold with full impact in the coming decade or so. So that's why it's called looming. So we'll talk about these two RMAs. And then, of course, there are a set of technologies which may not be revolutionary in nature, but have a transformative effect. So some of these technologies also come into the picture. Now, which technologies are we talking about? So coming to the ongoing ICT RMA. Now, what is this RMA? Essentially, at the heart of it, it is the linking of sensors, decision makers, and shooters over a network. So it's related to, very closely related to the concept of network-centric warfare. Uh, uh, and the underlying technologies are, as I said, one is ICT, which is a group of technologies, cryptography and space technologies. Actually, these two also subset of the broader range of ICT technologies. Otherwise, you talk of networks, the applications moving over them, and I would specifically want to highlight the cryptography and space aspects too. So the ongoing ICT RMA has spawned two concepts. One is the concept of network-centric warfare, which I just talked about. The other is the concept of information operations. But I avoid the term information operations because it has been abused quite a bit. I like to use the word military non-kinetic warfare as a result. More important than terminology is, what do we mean by this? It is essentially the combination of three types of non-kinetic capabilities: electronic warfare, cyberspace operations, and cognitive operations. I'll come to what these three specifically, how do you distinguish? And the underlying technologies. Now, when I say cyber and EW, it is all the technologies which is going to giving you the cyber capabilities. Same goes for EW. There are a set of technologies there. One of the things which gets neglected along the way is neuroscience and technology, which also plays a part in cognitive operations. And then you have directed energy weapons, anti-satellite directed energy weapons. These are also play a role in non-kinetic operations. So two operational concepts related to the first so-called, which I am calling it as ongoing ICT RMA. And how do you distinguish between these three non-kinetic ones? There's often a confusion. That's why I often show this, I bring out this aspect. Electronic warfare, the weapon is EM energy, which targets machines. Something like, I mean, what I'm talking of is jamming of machines, etc. Cyber operations, the weapon is malicious code, which targets information and information systems. And it also has cyber physical effects when we target critical infrastructure, again through information systems, but it has physical effects also. So if you just use cyberspace as a medium, that is not cyber operation. That is use of malicious code to target information and information systems. And cognitive operations, the weapon is the message which targets human minds. There's a different facet to that, but we'll get to that later. So this is how to distinguish between these three non-kinetic aspects. Now coming to the second RMA which I talked about, the looming AI robotics RMA. I add robotics also now to it. Now, what is that? How does it manifest itself? Where is it going to manifest? So we all heard artificial intelligence. Everybody is talking of artificial intelligence, and in the civilian sector, you are coming across many applications of AI which are already there. In the military domain, we all know the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, act loop. Every aspect of the OODA loop is going to be made intelligent by the application of AI into these loops. So for example, when we talk of sensors, this OODA loop itself, as is shown on the slide, can be related to the sensor, decision maker, and shooter. The decide, orient part is the decision maker part. Observe is the sensor, and shooter is the act part of the OODA loop in the military context. So AI in sensors, sensor fusion, target selection, recognition, in decision making, autonomy, autonomous target prioritization, autonomous decision to engage, in shooter precision targeting, leading to lesser collateral damage. This is how AI is going to intelligize the military OODA loop. It also has an effect on every aspect of non-kinetic warfare. So for example, in EW, you have cognitive electronic warfare. Many things are there. Cognitive operations, we've heard of deep fakes, micro-targeted propaganda campaigns uses AI, and many other things where AI comes into the picture. Similarly, in cyber operations, both in offensive and cyber operations, AI is already started playing a role. So AI plays a role in kinetic. The first OODA loop which I talked about is mostly related to kinetic operations as well in the non-kinetic operations. Then the transformative technologies, which you can say does not fall into these two conceptualizations of the RMA which I just talked about. Now these are there are many, but these are what I put at the top of the stack. And I'm not going to talk of all of them. Hypersonic missiles are very important. Quantum space, I'm going to talk about. Nanotechnologies and biotechnologies, the further transformative impact, it's going to be somewhat in the future. I'm not going to talk about it. 5G, internet on military things are built into networks, etc. So really speaking, this talk doesn't focus on this. Out of these, space is one thing which will be focused on a little bit more. Now coming to a little more detail about these concepts. Network-centric warfare. The first thing to understand is that it is not a networking concept. Networks are only an enabler. It is a command and control concept of war fighting. What does it mean for us? I've already explained in broad what it means. So when you put together sensor, shooter, decision maker over a network, information sharing leads to better decision making at the end of it all. It's a very exotic concept. There are many higher versions of it, like self-synchronization of forces, power to the edge. So it's a very exotic concept. We are not going to talk about all that theory. What does it mean for us? Now, in the context of the left side of the slide, which you see, this relates to the army manifestation of network-centric warfare, which we've tried to, let us say, develop over the last 3 decades. I've been watching this. These are our TAC C3I and C4ISR systems which we've been developing. So there have been some successes and many which have not been, many systems which have not succeeded. So for example, the successful ones, ACCCS, Artillery Command Control System, the Battlefield Surveillance System has just recently been fielded. Similarly, ADCNR, you are hearing of this, Akash Tir, in Sindoor context also. Electronic warfare, of course, has been fielded. So these are 4 of the originally conceptualized TAC C3I systems, but there are many, especially to do with command and control. CIDSS, Command Information Decision Support System, asteroids. Now, CIDSS was supposed to be from corps headquarters down to the battalion headquarters. That was the CIDSS system. Asteroids was supposed to be from army headquarters down to corps headquarters. And BMS, Battlefield Management System, was battalion headquarters onward. They all to do with command and control at various levels. These have not seen the light of day, and some of them have been shot lows. ASM stands for Airspace Management. So in general, the IS vertical, now this is with reference to the Indian Army. I'll come to some tri-service aspects also, but with respect to the Indian Army, transformation of the IS vertical is an imperative. It's a strong recommendation which has been given in our study too. What that transformation means is a different matter, but we were given recommendations, detailed recommendations of all. But the IS vertical, for us to keep up with the changing nature of battle space, this requires a transformative change in how we go about absorbing technology for IS purposes. Now, first, some specific things. Closing the sensor shooter gap. So while we have UAVs already, now right now I'm talking of the current systems. UAVs which have already been inducted, the BSS, Battlefield Surveillance Systems, ACCCS are already there. But to close this loop, so for example, if there's a UAV which is flying, let us say 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers away, and if that feed is to autonomously feed into the BSS and thereafter into ACCCS, so that the shooter can take on, the whole thing becomes, automated or autonomous. I mean, we can go into the details of these subsequently, but work needs to be done. Not only within the army, now we are going in for tri-service, theaterization, etc. So in multi-domain operations, these sensor shooters will be spread across the 3 services. So how this loop closes, there's a lot of work to be done in making all these current systems itself interwork with each other. Progress is being made, but a lot more needs to be done. Then on the AD side, AD is also a very important aspect of the entire thing. Integration of Akash, Tir and IACCS. IACCS is the Air Force command and control system for air defense essentially. Akash Tir is what has been fielded just by the army. So integration of these two. And then the synergy between air defense and, you can say, signals. Essentially what I'm saying, the hard kill today is the charter of air defense, and soft kill, that is electronic warfare systems for targeting, let's say, counter US systems and other systems also. So there has to be a finer coordination between these. During Opsindur also, there was a talk of a counter US, EW grid, etc., etc. So there's work to be done there. And while I'll not elaborate on all the bullet points, the last one, intelligization of, so we are collecting a lot of data through existing taxi systems, including the new SITRIP management, which has been introduced now. The AI layer, which has to work over all the data which is collected, and so that the whole thing becomes more intelligent in the output that we get out of all these support systems. So a lot of work is required. It's not trivial to build an AI layer over our taxi 3I and C4 ISR systems. So far about the current, what we need to do about the current systems. Now, another aspect is tri-services net centricity. As of now, the networks of the three services are pretty robust. Army, Navy, Air Force, all three are pretty robust with the rolling out of the network for spectrum, etc. Very robust systems. But tri-services networking. So coming to the network per se, today we have something called a point of connect, interconnect between the three networks, service networks. But that is not good enough for seamless implementation of tri-service applications, including command and control applications across the three services, especially in view of the fact that we are going for theaterization. So while technically everything is feasible, there are some, let us say, tri-service aspects which are coming into the play because of different perceptions of security and all. So work needs to be done to make a seamless, full stack tri-service network integration to happen. So that's one area. Data. Now, data within the three services. Now, if we have to exploit AI, data, as they say, is the oil for artificial intelligence. So we require military data. In any case, it's lying all over the place at various headquarters. Again, security considerations come into play, but we have to find ways and means of getting this data together, because without huge amounts of data, and there are many other things which come into the data part. There's not enough time to cover that, including generation of data and things like that. But data integration, not only within each service, but across the three services, is a very important facet of what needs to come when we are talking of the AI RMA. And of course, the command and control aspects, tri-service command and control aspects. Once the applications start functioning, only then you can have joint command and control architectures, because unless you have technology support behind all it, it's not going to function in today's modern battle space. So these are three aspects of tri-service net centricity as underpinning the theaterization move which we are going in for. Now I come to the first of the many different facets, which is drone warfare. And everybody's been talking about drone warfare. And we've seen a lot of it in the Azerbaijan conflict, as well as, of course, in the Ukraine conflict. And of course, we had the flavor of this. When we talk of this, basically, we are talking about drone warfare of all types of drones. So the first thing which needs, the way you look at, I use the term UVs or UCVs. It is not just UAVs, and drone is a colloquial name. So basically all types of drones, not only in the air, but the sea and ground domains. Everywhere, unmanned drones are going to impact the battle space. Are they going to serve only as force multipliers, or are they a force in themselves? Now that change of mindset, if we are convinced that they're a force in themselves, the way we go about it will be quite different. Today, many of our people in uniform, including at every level of hierarchy, feel that they are in the nature of force multipliers. Whereas the thought which is emerging, seeing all these aspects which are happening in various wars, is that it is bring out a transformative, revolutionary change as a force in itself. Drones by themselves are a force. Not that does not necessarily mean that you create a drone force, but I'm just saying. So that is the first aspect which one needs to convince ourselves about, as to what is this impact of drones on the battle space. Now, just to give some examples, 2/3 of the Russian tank destroyed in the Ukraine war was by drones. 10% of Russian oil refinery capacity were destroyed by drones. Spider's web, we all know of the recent operation against, strategic bombers and all, which Ukraine carried out. And this is all from the Ukraine side. Enough has been done from the Russian side also. USVs. I don't know how many of you are aware. The sea babies and the Magura drones of Ukraine, how they have driven the Black Sea fleet of the Russia out of the conflict areas. And of course, last month's the first reported instance of a autonomous sea drone Magura 5 destroying a fighter aircraft Su-30 of Russia. Earlier, some helicopters were, of course, destroyed, but this is the first time a fighter aircraft has been destroyed by a sea drone. So that's the capability which drones are achieving, and it's growing by the day. So these are only some examples. There's been a full-fledged ground drone attack carried out by Ukraine in one of the battles. Organizations. Russia has come up with the Rubicon Center. They also are now terming it as something like a drone troops, just like EW troops and other cyber troops, drone troops. Ukraine has come up with a unmanned system forces, the first organization of its kind which is purely meant to carry out drone warfare. So many such. So if you see the elements of what has been happening, they all fulfill the requirement of what I was talking of, the basic requirements of how you classify a thing as a revolution in military affairs. Now, what do we do about it? So that's the important part. Now, when we look at these drones, we have to incorporate in our context into our doctrines, tactics, operations. How do we go about doing that? So if we have for example our CGs, combat groups and combat teams, etc. Those are the tactics that are used by mechanized forces. With drones coming in, should those tactics change? Today's tactics, there's something called a destroy and maneuver. That is a type of tactics which is used by the mechanized warfare. Now, when we are in the fixing mode and we expect enemy reaction, and instead of a mechanized reaction, an onslaught of drone comes in, what does the thing do? So anyway, in short, what I'm trying to say is that we have to visualize, reimagine the manner in which mechanized warfare is going to take place, carry out brainstorming followed by test beds, and evolve fresh tactics. We can't wait for a full-fledged high-intensity conflict to evolve our tactics. We have to think this out through and test it out in test beds and thereafter exercises. And let me tell you that in a limited manner, some organization changes, in fact, this is open domain information, swarms have been inducted by our own armored corps, and they are already inducted, and a concept change has taken place, but in a limited manner. It has to occur across the board, and more thinking has to go into it. Similarly, if there's a future Kargil, will it's again infantry, and I'm talking about infantry tactics, will we go in and fight bunker by bunker as we fought Kargil, or should the initial onslaught of the bunkers which are there on top will be done by armed drones? I mean, that seems to be the obvious choice, but that needs to be brought into the tactics of how we carry out infantry operations in mountains, and so on and so forth. They are just two examples. CI force. So whatever is the technology, and in fact now we are talking of drone warfare, how these drones will get incorporated. So what we need to do is we need to create an ecosystem for concept evaluation. Now here we are talking of innovation in warfighting, not innovation in technology. The technology is there. Certain amount of innovation is required in that technology to adopt it. But there's an innovation in warfighting techniques which needs to be done, and for that an ecosystem requires to be there, where warfighters are also there. You have the innovators in let us say centers of excellence, premier institutions like IITs, etc. Then you have the entrepreneurs who will carry out the necessary innovation, whatever we felt is required. Even the bigger players in the private sector. So the entire innovation of how to incorporate this new technology into our tactics and operations, we have to create that. Technical studies also required to be done. I'll not go into that. And AI enabled. Now, when we talk of drone warfare, so far I'm talking of most of these drones which we've seen so far are piloted drones. They are not autonomous drones. And when I talk of autonomy, there may be a certain amount of autonomy in current drones also, like navigation, etc. But when we are talking of fully autonomous drones, we are talking of there's something called a critical select and engage functions. So the selection and engagement of targets, including all the autonomous part of going to the navigation, etc., the entire thing is autonomous. So AI enablement of drones is one thing which is not receiving enough attention, and a lot of work is going in this area, and a lot of there are some ethical aspects involved there. I'll not go into those ethical aspects also, but we need to focus in this area, AI enablement of drones to come up with autonomous weapon systems. So there are some other, so classification of drones, structural review of organizations, those flow out of all these drones which we are acquiring. Air defense. In air defense, there's so much of activity with all types of drones and other things which are coming into the battlefield today, that you require different types of, firstly, systems to tackle drones, counter UAS systems, and then AI also needs to come in for airspace management, because airspace itself is becoming very complex. So AI tools are required for managing the airspace. So these are many other things which are related to drone warfare. Now I'll switch to the AI enabled warfare part. So I talked of the AI robotics RMA. Actually, I'm treating these two RMAs in the reverse order. Of the AI robotics RMA, I tackled the robotics part, and now I'm coming to the pure AI part. How AI, other than related to autonomous systems, how that plays a role. So the first thing we have to convince ourselves is AI going to revolutionize 21st century battle space? Are we convinced about it? Or is it just something which will creep along on its way? So that the mindset will guide as to how much effort we are going to put into AI. Now let me tell you, I don't know how closely you're following. Everybody, I'm sure, has used ChatGPT and things, but the leading technology leaders today are of the view. I think I'm going pretty slow, so I must speed up how I'm covering the topic. So they're of the view that artificial general intelligence, that means by the end of this, or maybe in the next 5 to maximum 10 years, some say even earlier, machine intelligence is going to exceed collective human intelligence in the next 5 to 10 years, and society will not know what has hit them. That is the view of most of the leading AI technology leaders today. And this is going to reflect in the battlefield itself. And there are 5 levels which have been defined on the road to AGI, that is artificial general intelligence. So we have already seen chatbots and reasoners. This year is the year of agentic AI. Again, there's no time to go into details of this. And there are 2 more stages: innovation, and when AI starts running whole organizations. So that's in the civil domain. This translates to, now this is my conceptualization, in the military domain. It would translate to, each of these stages would translate to what it means for the military domain. So for example, agentic AI. In the civil domain, it means all secretarial work will be handled by AI. In the army domain, I think it would translate to all staff work can be handled by AI, because AI will become so intelligent. And similarly, at the higher levels, operational and strategic planning. Today, we feel that commanders only, they have the experience, etc. But if collective human intelligence is going to be overcome by machines, then operational and strategic decisions would also be taken by AI. This is the visualization of leading technology leaders. We can get convinced, or whatever our view is on this, we have to think about it as to how closely we are following the changes or revolution in AI which is taking place, and how we want to leverage it in our own context. So essentially, there are 3 pillars which have to be focused on. One is compute. The second is expertise. And the third is data. Data I've already talked about. Today, our focus on AI is on the narrow AI. That means target recognition and things like that, or extracting intelligence from data. These are all narrow AI applications. They are not general AI applications. When we talk of general AI, we're talking of large language models and multimodal models, etc. That is what is happening in the commercial domain. So we need to have, so one of our strong recommendations was we need to have a captive LLM, or you can say large model, multimodal model, captive to the defense, because for security reasons and many other reasons, it needs to be captive. And for that require a tremendous amount of compute. And we've recommended, for example, exascale computing. Exascale is a certain type of computing. What we are presently targeting in our projects and what we've recommended is two orders of magnitude difference as to what we should be doing. And it's well within the financial capabilities of our defense forces, provided we take it up in the right manner. Similarly, AI task force. So while a lot of expertise is there in the commercial domain, which needs to be tapped in our primary institutions and in the private sector, entrepreneurs, etc., but there has to be a critical mass of experts within the armed forces to be able to absorb that expertise. So that is the AI task force. And of course, data management I've already talked about. And everything has to be in mission mode because things are moving very, very fast outside. And I can assure you that our primary adversary, China, is pushing in billions and billions of dollars in the commercial, and I'm sure while that is classified, they are doing a similar thing in the military domain also. So we have to take cognizance of that. The second part of that is, which I referred to as autonomous weapon systems. There's a huge number of, there are many assorted things, articles which you come across, what China is doing. I've flashed some of these here. And every day some new aspects comes up as to how autonomy is being built up by China. More and more autonomy is built into the robotic systems, and our own things are also there, but there's a differential, and so we need to work towards. And this is an area which is our strength. That is an important point to note. It is our strength. AI, soft disciplines are all our strength as far as India's strengths are concerned, and we can take a lead in this area provided enough focus is given. So much about the AI robotics RMA. Now I'll come to the second part of it, the second RMA, the non-kinetic warfare. So already at about half an hour. Right. Now in non-kinetic warfare, one of the main things which needs to be which needs to be thought by our decision makers and whoever is looking at future warfare is that there needs to be a recalibration of the balance between our kinetic capabilities and non-kinetic capabilities. Now, what does that mean? You see, today our focus is on kinetic capabilities. We are convinced that yes, non-kinetic warfare has taken more and more potency. It is leading to combat potential. But that requires resources, both in terms of manpower and capital. The total amount of defense budget and the manpower which we have accretions is limited. It's not likely to increase. So where is this additional accretion going to come from? So there has to be a flow from the kinetic to the non-kinetic domain if we have to build up our kinetic capabilities. But anybody will do that only if it is convinced that this rebalancing will lead to an overall increase in combat potential. So first, that conviction has to be there, that if you reduce something from the kinetic domain and bring it to the non-kinetic domain, is it going to lead to an overall increase in combat potential? Because if it is not going to, then why would you recalibrate or rebalance? So that's the first thing to be convinced about, which needs to be evaluated. All these have been discussed and presented, and so it's for the decision makers to take a call on this and for everybody to seriously evaluate as to what is happening. Now I'll talk of each of these separately. Now in cyber, I'll start with cyber. And in cyber, I would like to focus more on offensive cyber operations. Offensive cyber operations, the first point I wish to make is that it is perfectly acceptable to carry out offensive cyber operations as part of a justified war. That means as part of multi-domain operations in a justified war. Generally, offensive operations are not talked about. They are talked about in hush-hush tones, something very, very secretive. The reason for that is the misplaced assumption, I would say, presumption, that these are carried out during gray zone overtly. Now, that is not what I'm talking about. and I'll throw a little more light about it. Basically, we're talking of offensive cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure of the adversary, military critical infrastructure, anything that affects military capability during war, or taking out his systems, including satellite systems, air defense systems, etc., using cyber means. Those are the offensive operations in a justified war, are perfectly acceptable. And if it is perfectly acceptable, we should be as willing to talk about offensive cyber operations as we talk about tanks and aircraft and ships, which we flaunt our capabilities. We should be able to do that and then carry out capability development accordingly. So that's the main point about offensive cyber operations. You also need to know that the Belfast Cyber Power Index, the last one came out in 2022, is the only one which captures, the reputed one which captures cyber power, not just cyber security aspects, cyber power. And in that, as you see, in the comprehensive cyber ranking, our main adversary, China, has been ranked at number 2, and we are at 26 amongst 30 nations aspiring cyber power that this index captures. And in offensive cyber capability, China is at 3 and we are at 22. So there's a differential there, and the differential has a reason. So because of the resources put in. Now there are many facets of offensive cyber operations. So in this slide I've shown there's an all-out conflict. So this is relates to who should carry out cyber operations. So it is very clear that in all-out conflict as multi-domain operations, the only adequate or agency which should carry out this is the armed forces. So the charters are not very clear. There are certain charters which have been given as of now. I'll not go into those details right now. But it is very clear that armed forces need to take on, because it's part of multi-domain operations, and some of them have to carry it out at the tactical levels also. So, but in the gray zone, now there are 3 other types of things which are there. There's something called persistent engagement, defend forward. I'll again skip the details of that. Deterrence by retaliation, signaling, where you signal something to deter anybody from, targeting. So, for example, the attack on a Bombay electrical grid, presumably, attributed to China, I feel is a form of signaling, also in Ladakh. So, is a form of signaling that, okay, we have this capability. So, it is part of deterring the adversary from carrying out attacks. Then, actual strategic operations in the gray zone. Stuxnet is a very good example of that, where Israel and US, that's what is well accepted, destroyed the centrifuges of Iran, setting back the nuclear program by several years. And that's all a gray zone operation. It is not part of an all-out conflict, but this is actual use of cyber operations for carrying out strategic effects. So there are many facets in the gray zone. And then, of course, there is part of multi-domain operations. So 4 different ways in which destructive, I'm not talking of cyber intelligence here. I'm talking of carrying out disruptive effects in the adversary domain is what I refer to as offensive cyber operations, and we have to build capability. It has strategic effects. I can give several examples of that. The famous one is the US colonial pipeline, where state of emergency was declared by the US in 17 US states, and a lot of disruption took place, attributed to Russia actually. Then Ukraine, the satellite, the Viasat network of Ukraine, which Ukraine armed forces were very heavily dependent upon. In the very first couple of months of war, this Ukraine war, this Viasat network was attached and several thousand terminals were put out of commission. So this is an example, the first example, or very good example of cyber operations as part of multi-domain operations, when kinetic operations are also going on. So it can definitely create strategic effects. That much is very clear. Many organizations, US, this slide flashes the US Cyber Command, which came up in 2010. The strategic support force, now it is called the cyber part, it has been bifurcated again to a cyberspace force. Russia has got its GRU, SVR, FSB, UK. So this is what other global practices are there in huge amounts. So for example, talking of China, the erstwhile strategic support force, the estimated strength is somewhere around 175,000 personnel. Of course, they are looking after space, cyber, electronic warfare, and cognitive, all 4 aspects, but 175,000 personnel. So huge amount of resource. And we have our Defense Cyber Agency and what resources we have. So we have to look at where the differential lies. Also, important point here is there has been an inexorable shift of offensive cyber mandate from the intelligence agencies to the armed forces. A close analysis of these will show this shift. So having said this much, what are the recommendations? Okay, today we have the NCI, PC, the CERTs. I already talked of the Defense Cyber Agency, and MHA for crime purposes has got a Cyber and Information Services Division. But what do we do? So one of the strongest recommendations is we need to upgrade the Defense Cyber Agency to a cyber command, and by that I mean something like 5,000-6,000 personnel at least to start with. Develop capabilities overtly and in a mission mode. That cyber requires very high level of specialization, and it has to be, most of it has to be captive. Some of it can be non-captive, most of it has to be captive. And for that, we've got to transform our HRD policies. So essentially, scale, scope, and sophistication. Scale means the numbers we have. Scope means the type of activities that we do, including cyber electromagnetic activities. So we have to increase the scope, not just stick to cyber intelligence, targeting critical infrastructure, the scope, and the sophistication, which means how well, how strong we are in carrying out these operations. Sophistication of those activities all require greater focus. Defensive, I think I'll just leave it. The only point which I want to say, defensive cyber operation means defending our own cyber networks is in good hands. We need not even bother about that. When we are talking of critical infrastructure, it is handled by private and government organizations. So their critical infrastructures, the manner of defending that has to be a whole of nation affair. That's a different ballgame. Armed forces has got limited role to play in that. However, there is one aspect of critical infrastructure or whole of nation affair which needs to be given a thought, and that is the aspect of building whether or not we should build a national firewall, especially around our critical infrastructure. China has got its Great Firewall of China. Russia has also come up with something very similar. So there's some thinking going on at the national level, but there's no serious thought. So whether because of the strategic effects which cyber is having, whether we should go in for a national firewall, at least for a critical infrastructure, and who's going to man it is to be seen. Coming to electronic warfare. So the main point here is there's no shortcut to allocating requisite accretions in terms of manpower and capital. So I'll not spend so much time on electronic warfare. Only a couple of things which I want to highlight here. Firstly, at the forward edge, mechanized warfare, air defense radars, UAVs are some of the areas where electronic warfare is most effective. And now precision munitions is something which we do not normally think of. Electronic warfare can target precision munitions because the precision munitions themselves are dependent on GPS, satellite communications, and drone swarms as in when they come up. So these are many new areas which have come up in on the model battle space, all of which EW is likely to be very, very effective against these systems. And in future scenarios, with the proliferation of networks, sensors, multi-domain operations, and of course UAVs and swarms, the importance of electronic warfare is only going to grow because the increase in attack surface, and China is doing quite a lot, again spending a huge amount of resources in developing its EW capabilities. And so what are the recommendations on EW? One of the broad recommendations is today we have a scaling of EW brigade per command. It should be upgraded to EW brigade per corps. There's a rationale behind that. It's not that you're just scaling it up. Originally, the EW brigades were meant to support a corps only. It's the way EW gets deployed across. And now with UAVs coming from all over the place, this is the only type of EW scaling and if we compare with what Russia has got the strongest EW deployments today, including in the Ukraine war. If we compare the scale, and of course China, the MI assessments of China is much more than what so they've got a significant amount. I don't want to draw comparisons here. All I'm trying to say is this is one of the recommendations to increase, and this amounts to an increase of something like 10,000 approximately personnel. This is what it amounts to, this sort of a scaling up rate. Where is it going to come to? This is where you come to recalibration or flow of things from connected to the non-connected domain. Because accretions, otherwise you can't keep on increasing your armed forces. State-of-the-art equipment. So that requires capital investment and an assessment of that. If we come up to EW brigade per corps and give them all state-of-the-art EW equipment, amounts to something like 25 to 30,000 crore. That's the amount of money which we are talking about. So all that has to be dovetailed into our existing defense allocations. And because if we have this sort of a thing, then we can deploy forward track vehicles, etc., etc. And so these are the nature of recommendations. We should not forget capabilities, special capabilities against UAV and aircraft jamming. Having EW platforms, our adversaries have them, and directed energy weapons. So laser and high power microwave. In the broader concept of EW, the directed energy weapons comes under electronic because it's in the EM domain that these directed energy weapons are there. But so these are the areas where EW needs to be worked on. The final part, I mean, there's one more on space. So I'm already at about 40 minutes plus. I'll take about 5 to 10 minutes more. I hope that is okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll definitely be able to finish, I think, in the next 10 minutes or so. Now coming to cognitive operations. Now here again, there are only some things which I want to highlight. Firstly, there is a need to distinguish between national cognitive operations and military operations. So the cognitive operations in support of military operations, there the charter is clearly that within the armed forces. Why I'm bringing out this difference is that whenever we talk of narrative warfare, information warfare, all these are terms used to represent operations in the cognitive domain. We say it's supposed to be a whole of nation affair. Yes, it's supposed to be a whole of nation affair. But there's a subset of that which is purely meant in support of military operations. That capability needs to exist within the armed forces. And of course, certain amount of capability in the armed forces will dovetail into the overall national capability of carrying out cognitive operations. So, first I'm talking about the in support of military operations. So it's a very specialist field, and it has got clear I have been able to identify 5 different sub-disciplines which are conceptually different from each other. So for example, when we talk of psychological operations by its very term, it's supposed to target the will of the enemy. Whereas PI, we have a ADG PI. So PI is, and psychological operations, you can use deceit for that because you're targeting the will and you're targeting combatants and the will of the combatants to not fight. That is what psychological ops are meant for. Whereas PI is supposed to be disseminating truthful information to not only adversary combatants, but international audiences, your own domestic audiences, so that your own picture is correctly stated. Something like the briefings which were done during Ops Sindoor. That is what is PI. So that's conceptually different. Military deception is again conceptually different. It targets the mind of the commanders on the other side to take wrong operational decisions. That's a completely different cognitive, again it's cognitive warfare of a different kind. Similarly, civil military operations and military diplomacy. So this table gives out the various differences. So we have to understand each of these and develop them as expert disciplines. It can't be done on a tenure basis. There has to be, so I'll come to the recommendation subsequently. The other part is that I was talking of, now when I said that message is the weapon, we are talking of info weapons there, where message is the weapon to target the human mind. But there is also another aspect which is neuro weapons, which targets the mind themselves. So I'll have 1 or 2 slides towards 3 or 4 which I have here. So both types of things are there in cognitive warfare. And the other aspect is that while the military, in support of military operations, they are targeting combatants, but there is also an aspect of targeting whole societies. And this is where this narrative warfare, which we are talking about, where narrative warfare itself can lead to revolutions, etc. So that's a cognitive warfare where whole societies are being targeted. So it's a, I'll skip this slide because of shortage of time. What I'm trying to say, it's a very And when we use cyber as a domain for cognitive operations, it's referred to as cyber influence operations. So the entire cognitive discipline, especially cognitive operations carried out over cyber, it's a very complex field. It has got many techniques and stratagems, and it has to be developed as an expertise. And we within the armed forces also have to develop this expertise and not just do it as a gut feeling sort of a thing, which currently we are doing on a tenure basis. There are some enabling technologies also which support cognitive operations. So, for example, hacking of personal information, bots, creating of fake accounts, deep fakes, use of AI, etc., etc. So, and there are some examples. We also can carry out cognitive operations against adversary populations, but there are ethical aspects involved there. So, firstly, there are many ethical aspects involved. Freedom of broadcast media. Should we control our media from strategic perspective, or should that not be done? Because we talk of freedom of media. So, should we control our media? That's one ethical question. Should we carry out cognitive operations against adversary populations, which can lead to death, destruction, etc.? Should we employ neuro weapons? So there are many ethical aspects which also we need to deliberate upon and arrive at conclusions, deliberately arrive at conclusions and follow them accordingly. Neuroscience and technology, I'll just briefly slide. There is a whole branch of neuroscience and technology called the NBIC technologies, nano, bio, information and cognitive sciences. So I'll leave that just for your information. There is this aspect where the idea is that you target the brain directly, not just the information. So for example, if you've heard of the Havana syndrome, you target through microwaves, you're targeting the brain and disorientation. Then you can use biological warfare is another where brains can be targeted and so on and so forth. So it's a whole new branch, which at least in the armed forces, I don't think we are giving it any focus, but it needs to be looked at. And capabilities, having organizations to do this. So US has been having its PSYOPs groups for a long time, considering of several battalions. China, the strategic support force, now it has been bifurcated. It's got a 3 warfare strategy. ISPR, 4,000 personnel estimated, several thousand crores. That's the type of resource Pakistan defense forces are spending on cognitive operations. So we need to, so what are the recommendations? Firstly, there has to be an apex level organization because it's a whole of nation affair. But within the armed forces, we need to, just like we set up the Defense Cyber Agency, as a pilot, at least we start with a Defense Cognitive Operations Agency and develop this expertise as a specialty. And of course, also look at aspects of neuroscience and technology and how can it facilitate military operations. And there is an aspect of integrated employment. So cyber and electronic warfare, CEMA activities, I've already said cyber influence operations where cyber and cognitive is involved and so on and so forth. So integrated deployment. The last part is on space. A couple of minutes there. Now,
Absolutely, sir.
Sorry, something?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So there's only one or two things on space which I want to highlight, and that is that it requires a lot of capital, etc. India, of course, is a space power, but the differential is there with our primary adversary, and that this new aspect of satellite mega constellations. So you all heard of the Starlink. Starlink is oriented towards communications, but there is a Star Shield also of the US, which focuses on the defense part, using Elon Musk SpaceX capabilities for probably communications and surveillance. I mean, those ideas are classified. The main point here is today we are dependent on for communications, for defense communications. There are only 2 satellites which are there as of now, which is this GSAT 7 and 7A, and they are in GEO. And with something called remote rendezvous and proximity operations, which can be carried out, even satellites in GEO can be knocked off. And so there are single points of failure. So we require resilience in space. That is the main issue which is being brought out here. So resilience can only be brought in through mega constellations in the LEO orbit. And China has already designed its, or let's say planned, two main constellations, the others also, but I'm talking of the Qianfan and the Guo Wang networks of 15,000 satellites and 13,000 satellites to be put up by the mid 30s. And the first 90 satellites of the Qianfan has already gone up, and I think about 27 satellites of the Guo Wang have already gone up. So it has started building up its mega constellations, keeping in view the strategic implications which Starlink has had on the Ukraine conflict. So that activity is already started by China. And so we should also be thinking as to how to get this for our forces. That's one part of it. The second part is the surveillance aspect. So I don't know whether you're aware. Let me just, yeah. So these LEO constellations are going to affect communications, sub-meter surveillance, and targeting, as well as our strategic targeting. Because for targeting require GPS, etc. And if GPS is not resilient, GPS is not available to us, then we'll not be able to, our strategic capabilities that we have, all our prithvis, etc., will be vulnerable, so to say. So what you see on the slide is SBS3. So far we had SBS1 and SBS2 from surveillance point of view. Recently, just a couple of months back, the government has sanctioned something called the SBS3. SBS stands for satellite-based surveillance of 52 satellites, which is supposed to come up by in the next 4-5 years. Now that would definitely, today in SBS2 we have just about 5 satellites which are giving us surveillance of sub-meter category. And this is all in the open domain, so there's nothing classified about this. And SBS3 is also in the open domain, 52 satellites. So this is an upgrade. But to make those mega constellations, even more effort is required. And I'm pretty sure the government is seized of it. But this is one area where, again, we have to keep at the top of our minds as to how to build in resilience, all from communications, GPS, and surveillance perspective. So that much about space. Also, counter space capabilities. So again, there's a lot of focus as far as China is concerned on counter space. We had our anti-kinetic, the Project Shakti, which we carried on in 2019. We destroyed a satellite at 200 kilometers or so. China carried out its test in 2007 at 800 kilometers, but that's not the point. Kinetic is not the answer because it creates a lot of debris. So that's not the solution. The laser and high power microwave is what is being focused on for anti-satellite, and of course the rendezvous and proximity operations. So China is doing hell of a lot. It's got this Sijian series of satellites, 17, 21, and latest is 25. Just about a couple of months back it was launched, which under the garb of debris removal, robotic arms and all, it's a dual use sort of a thing which can push out satellites from geo into other orbits or out of orbit, etc., etc. So this rendezvous and proximity operations, we carried out a SPEDX recently, that docking experiment which was carried out. That is all maneuvers in space. It's part of all this maneuvering in space. So this is another area which we need to be well aware of. So rendezvous and proximity operations and laser and high power microwave on the other, all in the realm of counter space capabilities. The differentials has been flashed on this slide. We have a Navik. So state is not all that great. It is a 7 satellite constellation. Only 4 are functional as of now. It gives us some capability, but we need to be much better than that. Beidou's 44 satellites for global coverage, so on and so forth. And of course, China's ahead of us. We are doing pretty well as far as space exploration is concerned with our Mangalyaan and our landing on the moon, etc., etc. But there is a differential, and a lot of effort is being made, but there's a differential which we should make cognizance of. And now I come to my last slide. Just a couple of aspects here. When we talk of, so the point which I'm trying to highlight here is that we need to, in addition to a defense acquisition procedure, we need to come up with a defense innovation strategy. How do we carry out innovation to absorb technology? That strategy is so far not there. We have a defense acquisition procedure, but innovation strategy is something different. So distinguish between the two. It has to be a obviously all these services have to be involved, industry, academia, DRDO, but services need to be driving it at the fulcrum. And I would say not MOD, but people in uniform should be driving it. That's my own opinion. And for that, we have to consider that technology is not just an enabler, it's a driver of future warfare. And we have to create, again, this critical mass of experts, not just for AI, but across all technology domains to be just, we need that expert lot to be able to absorb technology from outside, which we are unable to do efficiently as of now, as efficiently as is desirable, let me say, put it that way. And participative R&D, we have to sit along with the teams. So there are places where this is being done. For example, the VESI of Navy has been doing it. We also have gone in for this as part of DJS and all, but this has to be much more extensive as we sit along as embedded as part of R&D teams to get our defense projects done. And finally, critical sectors where we need to get things from outside, we cannot develop, I feel we cannot develop easily on our own, is firstly the chip wars, especially the AI chips, EW systems, very sophisticated, and we need to get it in fast measure as far as EW systems are concerned. And LEO constellations, we can develop satellites, but for launching, we need to, for cheap launching, we need to go in for partnerships. And finally, we have to focus on our talent. That's a very critical sector which we need to focus on. So finally, I've come to the end of my talk and open to questions, whatever they may be. I think I'll stop the presentation.